It's episode 3, and you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna have a little bit of a recruiting Lollapalooza extravaganza, whatever you want to call it. I just wanted to have some fun with it. Lars just wanted to have some fun with it. Let's talk some recruiting, baby.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Huskies podcast. It is Friday. It's Friday. I don't know why I just said that. I'm sorry. That was really dumb. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. We really appreciate that. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, wherever else. I know there are 100 other ones, but I mean, 98% of us use Apple or Spotify. Let's be real about that. Except my mom. I know my mom uses Amazon Music, and I was just like, wait, that's a thing? Didn't really know about that until she said that. I apologize, Mom. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We write for Inside the Huskies with Fan Nation and Sports Illustrated, and we are here to talk about some recruits, man. I know I'm a little excited, but I have some fun with it. If, for anyone who reads our work, I like to grind the tape and get stuff up real quick on some of these guys. And I've been grinding tape on some of these guys for a while. So today we're going to start with talking about the 2023 class for the University of Washington, which was ranked 29th overall by 247 Sports. And I want to talk a little bit about Caleb Presley. We haven't seen a lot from him this fall, but, for anyone you talk to inside the program, there's a lot to like. He was the top-ranked recruit in the state of Washington and the top-ranked recruit in Washington's recruiting class for 2023. Came in the spring, looked pretty good, after the inevitable mossing of Roma Dunze, or from Roma Dunze, I might say, because, that happens every time. But Lars, I know that you want to talk about another cornerback who, with no disrespect to Caleb Presley, his tape was a little bit more fun to watch, and that's Leroy Bryant. So you have the floor.
Yeah, Leroy Bryant wearing Jordan Miller's old number. And when you look at him on the sideline, when you look at him just going through natural drills, he kind of has that similar mold, but he's a lot bigger. And I don't mean like bad. I mean, he looks like he's already been in the program for a couple of years. He's got the real gun show.
You mentioned his biceps the other day, and I was like, ooh, I think I need to go do some extra curls.
For real. I mean, he puts me to shame, just like Taylor Rapp put me to shame when he walked up with a tank top, and I'm like, okay, you're 17, and I'm way out. So, those are the guys that last season, Javion Green as a freshman got to play a little bit, but he didn't really, he doesn't have that type that Leroy Bryant has. He's a former basketball player, Leroy is, and I think that's going to make an impact pretty quick for him on the field in terms of his ability to go up, be a ball hawking corner, because you don't want guys that can just run with guys. You need guys that can actually force turnovers, because that's one thing Washington struggled with last season was forcing turnovers. Leroy is a guy who's got I would have to say a 39, 40-inch vert. I think, a couple of years down the line, he's going to be one of those guys. He's going to be one of those guys. So I think it'll be curious to see how much time he gets this season, but I think it's going to be hard for the staff to keep him off the field.
No, you're absolutely right. I don't know how much we're going to see him this year. I'm sure that they're going to try to work in him, Presley, and we can't, not mention Curly Reed. Getting a 4-star from Louisiana is always awesome. But we might see them get up to 4 games. I don't want to put yes, we can talk about that. We can say that, but Curly Reed also deserves a shout out just for being who he is. I know you also want to talk about the offensive line, and I just want to say that the very interesting thing that, you have to notice is the size that whenever you look at some of these previous classes that Scott Huff has brought in, we can talk about guys like Miles Morale, guys like Troy Fautanu, Roger Rosengarten. The list goes on of talented players. Just look at the entire offensive line, Julius Buelo, Nathan Kalepo. Like, the list goes on and on of talented players that Scott Huff has brought in. And, in outside of Landon Hatchett, who I know you'll get to in a second, he kind of just said, I don't care about rankings. I am looking for body types. And you look at Sione Fasolo, I'm still trying to get that one down, and Kaylee Tafai, and you're just like, oh man, you talk about saying, looking at Taylor Rapp's biceps, just look at these guys, they're like a foot taller than we are, which is wild. And I mean, just Yeah, it's just kind of jarring, and you can't describe it without being up close and personal to these dudes. But I know you want to talk about Landon Hatchett, who is the highest ranked offensive line recruit that the Huskies pulled in for the class of 2023.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and to your point, when we look at the center position, who's ahead of Landon right now? It's Parker Brailsford, who is a little undersized at 6'2", 6'3", 270, 275. He wants to get up a little higher. But Landon, when he's been able to get those second team and third team reps, and you just look at him, he just looks like a natural center, and he fills out the position a little bit more. And for Washington, when you're going to the Big Ten, you need all those big bodies to fill out. Elijah Jacket is another one to tackle where you just look at him and he's a massive guy.
I can't believe I didn't mention him. That's on me, and I'm sorry.
I thought you were actually leaving him off, like specifically omitting him, so I could, because I was like,
yeah, well, hey, here's the handoff. Take it.
That was the first, just watching him when their offensive linemen are going through their drills with Scott Huff, and he's just standing there in the back. I'm just like, that dude is a solid foot taller than me, and probably actually got a couple more inches on top of that. It's ridiculous, but I think Scott Huff, we've always known he's been a great recruiter. I think from his days at Boise State to when he came over with Chris Peterson at Washington, he's always been able to find the right. He knows what it takes to be an offensive lineman because he played the position. He was an offensive lineman. He's a guy that was in the trenches, and he's like, so he knows when you're going against these bigger schools and especially the Big Ten Conference, you need big tackles who are athletic. Look at Roger Rosengarten. It's kind of in a similar mold to Elijah Jacket. They're different types, don't get me wrong, but they're both big, tall, athletic, and long. That's what you need on the outside. What do you need on the inside? And specifically said it with Landon Hatchett, you need an anchor. You need that guy that can anchor the middle of the line, but can also move and be agile. And Landon's small enough to where he's agile, but he's big enough to where he's a little bit bigger than Parker Brailsford. And I think even though Parker is going to get more time than him, I think in the long run, Landon might be the better center prospect. That doesn't mean Parker can't play another position because we've seen a bunch of guys do that. But I think for Landon specifically, he's going to be that anchor 3-4 years down the road, for 3 or 4 years down the road, that is going to say that's a Scott Huff offensive lineman, true and true.
No, you're absolutely right about all that. And one guy I want to get to real quick here before we get to our sponsor for the day is I want to talk about Keith Reynolds, because Jamarcus Shepard was touted as, a big recruiting guy when he got here, pulled in 2 4-stars in Tayshawn Lyons and Rasheed Williams. And the guy who's impressed me the most so far at camp is 3-star Keith Reynolds. And people are going to have very jaded opinions on what I'm about to say. He is a souped up Giles Jackson. They're the same height. We heard Giles the other day at practice as they were going through a blocking drill talking about short people problems to Keith Reynolds. But Keith just kind of is faster. He's twitchy. They're having him, return some punts. And you said it to me before the show, Lars, that if Keith Reynolds was the only guy of those 3 receivers in this class to play this year, you wouldn't be surprised. And, I totally agree. And speaking of souped up, I want to talk about eBay Motors, our sponsor for the day. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. And when you shop on eBay Motors with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Huskies country, let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right.
Russell Wilson would be so proud of that.
Thank you. I'm very proud of it. It's in the ad read, so I had to throw in the Huskies country.
I knew that was the case, but I still had to get that in there.
No, so we talked about it the other day in a lockdown meeting where everyone said, yeah, I throw in, whatever country, let's ride. I said, I might get a little bit extra because I am up in Seattle, but I don't care. I'm saying it anyways, especially because it was on the Alamo Bowl shirts. So very, very proud of that.
Fair.
Now, let's talk about 2024. And I'm sorry to cut you off because I want you to have the floor to talk about one of both of our favorite prospects in this class, Justice Williams.
Yeah, I talked to Jamarcus Shepard, who we were getting into a little bit there about his recruiting prowess. I asked him, how do you recruit guys? Because coaches on the record cannot specifically talk about guys they have not signed to the program.
Yes.
Goes for any school. But coaches absolutely can talk about how their recruiting style goes. And one thing I think that really blew me away, especially when we're talking about Justice Williams, is Shepard looks at the film, but then he goes right to the character and he goes right to the parents. And he wants to find out from the parents, hey, what are these guys like? On the field, off the field, things like that. And Justice Williams' father, I think we both know, is got some game.
Yep.
So
he's got a ring, man.
It was a little surprising to me that Justice was so under recruited, and his ranking is equally as disrespectful. But neither.
Hey, I will say though, I'm sorry. I will say On3 has righted that wrong, and they have him in their top 200 overall players now.
That's a start, but I think when everything is about perception, especially in recruiting. And when I look at you can talk about just one film, but just when you look at him, his body, what he brings to the table, he's a perfect taker for Jamarcus Shepard. Yes. He's that guy and especially when you're losing, you're going to lose about 3, maybe 4 receivers after this year. So it wasn't.
I don't know about 3 or 4 this year.
We'll see
over the next 2.
Right, first, but you're certainly losing Rome and Jalen, and you might lose, and you're losing Giles Jackson likely because I think he's out of eligibility after this season. Right. So, and if Jalen Polk has a big year, maybe not. There. But either way, you want to continue stacking bodies, and Justice Williams is that next guy. I think he's kind of more in the Rasheed Williams mold than anybody else in terms of the guys that just came in this past year. But I think he might have a higher ceiling. And I think that's what Jamarcus looks for above all else. And to your point, I think that's what Keith brings to the table too. They have much higher ceilings.
I like that. And, I was watching his film, and I'm going to make another bold comparison here. But his film reminded me a lot of Roma Dunze's because they have the same build. They're both 6'3.5", really, really fast, run pretty impressive routes for a high schooler. And it's just kind of like, I can see why, this guy, because even though he was unranked by 247 for the longest time, he had 18 offers, and he had good offers. So I think that that's a really big win. And, I'm sure on future episodes, we'll get into some of these other big time recruits. Like I really want to talk about Noah Carter, but there are other guys who I teased on yesterday's show that I'm going to get into here in a minute. But I also just have to do a quick tease for Monday and why you should tune in, because we are going to be breaking down everything that we saw in the first 6 open media practices. And just, we'll give you a little tease on what we've seen, what we liked. And there's a lot to like. Trust us. There's a lot to be excited about. One other guy that I'm really excited about watching when he eventually assumingly signs with Washington, and I had said it yesterday, Rachumana Bulabulavu. I practice his name. I make sure that I've got to get that one right. But I remember watching his film because, and this is no disrespect to anybody who has this ranking, but there's this certain connotation when you see, this guy's unranked, and he doesn't have that many offers. Oh, what am I going to get watching? And 3 plays in, my jaw was on the floor. This guy had 22.5 sacks in San Diego. I know he plays in, a lesser league, but whatever. 22.5 sacks and 22.5 sacks. I don't care. And then you keep watching the film and you're like, wait, this guy moves like Laiatu Latu. He's not the player that Laiatu was, but he moves just like him. He's got as quick of a first step as I've ever seen for like a guy who they want to play defensive tackle. It's unbelievable.
You know who he reminds me of as you say that?
Please.
Hirakanu.
I like that.
Because when I watched Maurice Himes' tape of his first game at Santa Margarita, and he was on kickoff coverage, I'm like, okay, cool, this guy's athletic, he can run. But the very first play on defense, you see this guy up the middle. I'm like, wait, that's not Maurice. Who is that guy? And by the way, at that time, had no offers.
No,
nobody. He was brand new to the United States, almost brand new to the game. And within about 3 plays, to your point, it was like, yeah, now I know why Inoki wants this guy. Now, yep. and who is Inoki known for recruiting and developing?
Polynesian players.
Well, and Aaron Donald.
And Aaron Donald, that too.
One of the most disruptive interior defensive linemen in the NFL. And I'm not saying he's Aaron Donald or any of that. But
you're going on record. You said he's Aaron Donald. You said he's Aaron Donald, so he's Aaron Donald now.
In the same breath, right? There's an ellipses in between the name and then Aaron Donald. But that's going back to my point about Shepard. These guys have a type. Specific off and off the field way that they want to recruit and get certain guys. And once they identify him, that's it. Like there isn't like they might have 50 guys, but there's really only about 5 to 7 guys at each position that they really are zeroing in on, depending on the class.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that they made a really great decision with having him be one of them, because it's not hard to see why they like him so much. And it's just a matter of turning on the film sometimes. And, there are a couple other guys that, as I said, we'll get to on future episodes, but there's just so much to like. I really like Elias Johnson. We can talk about DeMarcius Davis, but the one guy that I really want to talk about before we move on to filling out the rest of the class, because I'm sure everybody knows who we're talking about when we say just fill out the rest of the class, is I want to get into Elias Johnson. I want to get into this film because it's awesome. Another guy who didn't start playing football till high school, super athletic, track background, 6'3", yeah, he's 160 pounds, but it's you watch it, you just say, oh, to get this dude up to 185, 190 pounds? Yeah, this is incredible. This is exactly what you want to watch. And I mean, the ball skills are there. He's trained by a former All-American, Ifo Ekpre-Olumu, down in Portland, Oregon. And it's just the guy where you and I have both talked to him at si.com/college/Washington. That's where you find our work inside the Huskies. And he talked a lot about loving Washington and that his whole family has ties to the university and that he's been a Husky fan for his entire life. And there always has to be room in a class for a guy like that.
Well, especially with that size too. I mean, you can't teach size.
No.
When you're looking at other guys that they brought in, Darren Barkin, so most of them have been in that 5'10" and above range. Usually you're trying to get guys at 6'1", and that Elias is right around there, isn't he? He's 6'1", 6'2", somewhere in that range.
He's listed at 6'3", but probably closer to 6'2".
But the thing is about him, he plays above his height, and that's a lot of what Juice Brown likes. Most of his defensive backs is they can play above their height. I mean, Caleb Presley's not 6'3", but he plays above his height. Leroy Bryant certainly plays above his height. These are guys, again, we keep getting back to the same sort of thing. Once they identify the type that they want in their defensive backs, they go and get him. And I think Elias is that perfect fit. It was a little surprising, though, because he took about 5 or 6 visits to Oregon State. And when you're talking about guys that want playing time, and he's going to want to be playing early because you're, again, just who he is and the type of player he is, you're going to find a role for that guy. You have to. And I was a little surprised that he didn't take Oregon State knowing you could get 3 to 4 years of eligibility there. But Washington won out. And so I think it's a benefit to them and a credit to Juice Brown.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that the big thing where he knows he's not ready to play right away because of his weight.
That's fair.
That's the big thing.
Well, and the thing is, though, he's got enough time to where I'm curious. To that point, I'm curious between now and when he does enroll, how much weight can he add on? Can you arrive at Washington at 180? Because if you can, then I think there's a chance to where you're likely to get more playing time earlier. If you're still in that 170, 175 range, I think it's going to take a year in Ron McKeefery and in working with Ron McKeefery to really get him up to playing shape. But he's, from a mentality standpoint, he can play right away. But physically, I think to your point, he might be a little limited.
No, you're absolutely right about that. And now it's time to move on because talk about filling out Elias Johnson like his body type. Now we got to talk about filling out the remainder of the 2024 class. And I feel like I said it a couple minutes ago, but that discussion has to start with a 4-star defensive lineman from Armijo High School, Jericho Johnson. Lars, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those disruptive guys, probably we'd say top 3 on the West Coast, if not the country.
Oh, yeah.
He's truly a premier. I mean, this is a little bit of a stretch, but the impact and attention that Eddie Vanderdoes had way back.
Oh, yeah.
I think, because Jericho's narrowed it down to top 4, but I think had he kept things open, he would be having every school in the country calling him. So
I'm shocked he didn't consider Georgia and Bama still, truly.
And I think so. Partly, I think that's to Washington's credit and to the other schools that made his top 4. But I think that's also a statement to say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to wait around for you guys anymore because I know how good of a player I am. And if these 4 schools want me, I'm going to go there. And I think that's the credit to Inoki. But I think he's a guy that he would be probably the top player in the class if he signs.
Yep.
Fair to say, without question. I mean,
there's one other guy who's ranked a little bit ahead of him right now that we'll talk about. But in terms of the film, he would be the best player in the class by a landslide.
Exactly. Yeah. And it wouldn't even be close.
No,
And I think
not even close.
especially when we talk about moving to the Big Ten for Washington, that's a guy you have to have because we all know no matter what happens with the staff, no matter what happens moving forward, as long as Kalen DeBoer is on the sideline, Washington offensively is going to be fine. I've only covered the guy for a year, but I have no doubts that that's not going to be an issue. Where Washington is going to live and die between a 10-win team and making the playoffs and winning a national championship is on defense. And you need to continuously stat guys like that. You're getting an underrated guy. I'm going to let you pronounce the name in this class, but if you compare him with Jericho Johnson and really add, because you don't want just one of those guys, you need 2, 3, 4. Because as we've seen this year, we got Thule and Fatui, but you still need 2 or 3 guys behind him. Because if they're playing 60, 70 snaps a game, that's a recipe for disaster. So you need every year to be adding 2 or 3 big bodies in the middle that can not only be big bodies, but be aggressive pass rushers. I mean, not to plug a story here, but when I talked to Thule, he mentioned specifically this year he wants to become a better pass rusher from the interior side. I think Jericho is already miles ahead of where he is would be coming in as a freshman.
Okay, I like where you're going with that. I can definitely see that, and not to switch gears here, but I know it's something that needs to be talked about. And obviously these are shorter podcasts for our everydayers out there, but we need to talk about in-state recruiting because do you want to start or should I start? I really don't know.
So I'm gonna not defend Kalen DeBoer and the staff here, but I do think it's worth noting the context of when they arrived and kind of how it impacts the 2023-24 class, specifically for the 24 class, because they spent so much, basically all of their resources working on the 23 class and the immediate 22 class when they first signed. They never really had a chance to circle back to these guys that were offered by Jimmy Lake way back in 21, 22, because now it's 22, 23, and you're kind of just, you have to be moving forward as a head coach. Right. I think some of the in-state guys kind of fell through the cracks. And earlier this past summer, I wrote a story about Papa and Frise, where Washington made it clear during a camp that, hey, you do have an offer here. He's not going to end up at Washington. But I think it was more of a sentiment of like, hey, we've been so focused on 24, 25, 26, just kind of moving forward. We need to circle back to some of these guys in the state that we could still want to take. I mean, for example, Tristan Dunn was the guy the last staff didn't offer. Kalen comes in right away and says, yeah, that's the guy I want. Chuck Morrell, that's the guy I want. And he's going to be playing a decent amount this year. So I think there's guys in the state that Washington can still take. But I think the days of Washington signing 7 or 8 players from the state, I don't think that's going to be the case as much anymore. But you still want to be able to get the top 2 or 3 of the 5 players in the state. I think Washington they need to maintain that, in my opinion.
No, you're right. And I feel like it's the same thing we just talked about, right? Like, obviously you want to build the class through California. And that's not a slight to the state of Washington. That's just what needs to happen because that's where you're going to find the best players. And as they continue to just kind of make their imprints in the Midwest, you're going to need to pull more players like Dominic Kirks out of Ohio. That's something that has to happen. Yeah, it's not going to be an every year thing where, we're going to go hit Ohio harder than we're going to go around the state of Washington. But it's something that needs to be considered because that's who the competition is now. You need to get guys like that, guys from Texas, guys from all around the Midwest. We saw, the Lincoln Keinholz saga. Obviously, we saw how that played out. But Austin Mack is here, so again, different conversation. But it's something where I feel like there are very particular types that they're looking for at Washington. Where let's go through real quick the guys from the 2023 class that signed with Washington. Because correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm doing this off the top of my head because my computer's really slow today. There are 3. There's Caleb Presley, which the number 1 player in the state. Yeah, different story. Got to take that kid no matter what. Landon Hatchett, who is just a beast in the interior we talked about earlier. And then there's Jacob Lane, who just is drooling with traits.
Yep, I think that's the key. Well, first, and also Landon having his brother Gary in at Washington, they're both premier Power 5 caliber players. So those are absolutely 2 takes. And then Jacob's kind of a guy where you see what can be.
Yes. And
you look at the edge room and say, okay, well, we got these guys this year. We got a couple guys coming back next year. We got Maurice Himes. We got Anthony James coming up. Anthony James, I think that's a guy we're going to be talking about for a couple of years here come next spring.
No, absolutely.
Because right now we got Braylon Trice, ETF, and all the experienced guys. So he's kind of gotten buried a little bit. But again, to our credit, to our whole point here, you need to continuously be adding these guys year in and year out. And they've been doing that. But so it affords the opportunity to take a guy from the state that has the size, 6'5", 250, right, is what he's listed at. He looks like he can play a lot faster too, which I think is an intriguing option off the edge, because usually some of the edger guys you want to maybe a little bit bigger so they can be more physical. He's a quick twitch 1-2 returning and going. Not a Joe Tryon type per se, but start thinking in that similar mode of where nobody looked at Joe Tryon coming out of high school and said, absolutely, that guy's going to be a premier pass rusher.
Right.
But he had the traits, he had the body type, and he also had the approach to the game to where he's like, look, I'm going to become a great. We always kind of sensed that. I remember when he was coming out of Hazen, I just got always sensed that was a guy that was super driven. Jacob Blaine, he didn't talk much, but he does seem like that kind of guy to where he's like, I'm just going to put my head down and work. I'm going to get bigger, and probably in 2 years, I want to be factoring in the two deeps. And I think those are the kind of guys that you want to take out of Washington. 2 surefires and 1 guy that you can develop. 2 and 3.
And obviously the point we're alluding to here as we start to wrap up is we're talking about Jason Brown, where there's always going to be a spot for somebody like Jason Brown in this program.
Yep.
You kind of look at, and this is not a slight, but I think that there's one guy in this class that they truly would have taken ahead of him, and that's Nate Frazier from Modern Day.
Yep.
Because Nate Frazier, now 5-star Georgia commit, he seemed interested for a while, and things fell off. That's not our business to get into, whatever happened, because we don't know. But whatever happened there happened. Nate Frazier now going to Georgia. Props to him. But having a guy who's a top 100 recruit in state, it's something where you never want to shut that door. And to the coaching staff's credit, they haven't. And that's something where I wouldn't be surprised if there's an official visit for him coming in the fall to come to Washington, maybe, for the Oregon game. That's probably when they would try to line that up, depending on his high school schedule. But there's a lot to think about there, and it feels like this class is almost done. There's a spot for Jericho Johnson. There's a spot for Jason Brown. There's a spot for one more offensive lineman. Papa Afua looks like he's going elsewhere, but Ikenasi Otupu from California, measurables, looks a lot like a couple of guys from last year's class, and one just kind of roaming spot where it's like, oh yeah, maybe this guy, maybe this guy. We're not going to get any names of, the guys who might flip, because who knows what's out there.
And I do want to add a point on Nate Frazier. Washington did pluck an SEC running back in the transfer portal.
That's true.
So I think it's worth stating that Washington might not, because there's so many numbers at running back right now. I don't think it might have been a harder sell for Nate to come in and say, ooh, maybe I want to, whatever the case may be. But I think as that room starts to thin out in years, and if he's a year or two down the road at Georgia and he's not getting the reps that he can, Washington has already established that relationship to where, hey, we couldn't take you then, but doors always open. And if you want to come back to the West Coast, to the Big Ten, welcome up. And I think that's kind of a win-win for Washington right there.
Yes, and that's also the beauty of the transfer portal. All right, Lars, thank you for being here with me today. Be sure to go check out our work at Inside the Huskies at si.com/college/Washington. And remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Wherever you get them, subscribe to us. That's all we ask of you, please. And all you everydayers out there, be sure to tune in on Monday, and we're going to be breaking down everything we saw in the first 6 open media sessions from Washington's fall practice as the season is getting closer. Lars, again, thank you. We'll talk to you on Monday.